I remember when Grace first mentioned wanting to get back into painting. It was one of those late-night conversations, after a day that felt long, but somehow didn't bring anything new. Grace was quiet, her eyes distant. When she finally said it, I miss doing something creative. It was as if she was letting me in on a secret she'd been holding on to for too long. We had been married nearly 25 years, and I'd watched her, my grounded, dependable wife, put her dreams and hobbies on hold for our family. But now, as our kids were grown and finding their own paths, there was finally time for her. So, I encouraged her. I wanted her to rediscover what she loved, maybe even find something that would make her light up again. After a few weeks of subtle nudging, I suggested a local art class. Why don't you check it out? Might be a good way to meet people and find your rhythm again, I told her. At first, she seemed unsure, hesitant about joining a class after so many years. But eventually, she agreed, and one evening she signed up, barely looking back as she headed off with her art supplies in hand. Grace came back that night looking different, alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was brimming with stories about the class, about how vibrant it was, and about the instructor, Luca. From her animated descriptions, Luca sounded like the quintessential artist, charismatic, energetic, and passionate about his work. I'll admit, hearing her talk about him, it was hard not to chuckle. She was like a schoolgirl recounting her day, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. Luca says art isn't just about technique. It's about passion and freedom, she told me one night. He says we all need to let go of whatever holds us back, really find ourselves on the canvas. There was something in the way she described him that was new, maybe even wistful, but I brushed it off, convinced it was just enthusiasm for her new project. And if this Luca character could bring out that side of her, then who was I to judge? As the weeks passed, Grace became even more invested in her art. She'd come home later than usual, hands still splattered with paint, and tell me about what they'd worked on that night. We started a series of self-portraits, she explained one evening, excitement practically radiating from her. It's about exploring who we are beyond just what we see in the mirror. I listened, nodding and feeling a genuine pride in her newfound commitment. She had thrown herself into this passion project wholeheartedly, spending hours at the studio, and sometimes even sketching late into the night at home. She was always thinking about the next session, always speaking about new techniques Luca had shown them. It felt as if I had a front-row seat to a renaissance in her life. But as time went on, I started to sense something beneath the surface, an energy I couldn't quite put my finger on. She seemed lighter, happier, yes, but there was also a mysterious glint in her eye, a smile that hinted at something beyond just art. Maybe I should have paid closer attention. I should have noticed the shift sooner. Grace started attending her art classes more than ever, even arranging extra sessions. I just want to make the most of it while I'm inspired, she'd say with a laugh, brushing away any concern I raised about the cost or time commitment. You always said I should focus on myself, right? At first, I was glad she was so passionate about something again. But it wasn't long before I began to sense something I couldn't quite define, a growing presence in our marriage that wasn't mine. Every conversation seemed to drift toward Luca, her art instructor. It wasn't just admiration. It was as if she saw him as a window into a different world. He lives without a clock or schedule, she told me one night, her eyes lighting up as she recounted one of his amazing philosophies. He just paints when he's inspired, travels when he feels restless. No plan, no rigidity, just freedom. There it was again, that wistful tone in her voice, like she was gazing through a window at a life she felt she'd missed. Luca had a way of making her feel that their carefully planned life, with its mortgage payments and dinner schedules, was a cage she hadn't realized she was in. He says art should be messy, unpredictable, she added, almost like she was hinting at something. I laughed, a little nervously, trying to make light of it. Well, I hope he doesn't inspire you to start throwing paint around the living room. I joked, but she only smiled and looked away, her thoughts clearly still somewhere else. Things took a turn the night I found her texting after midnight. I'd woken up thirsty and went downstairs for a glass of water, only to notice the soft glow of her phone screen illuminating her face in the dark. She was laughing quietly, that same smile I'd been seeing more often. When I asked her who she was texting, she looked startled, like I'd caught her doing something she shouldn't. "Oh, it's just Luca," she said, her tone casual, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. I noticed the contact name, just a single letter, L. It started subtly at first. Grace's wardrobe shifted from her usual jeans and comfortable sweaters to long, flowing skirts, colorful scarves, and chunky jewelry that seemed entirely out of place in our quiet suburb. Her transformation was quiet, but unmistakable. She seemed almost lighter, more carefree, and I couldn't deny she looked beautiful, alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. The changes were intriguing, but unsettling. One evening, as she was heading out for a class outing with some of her art friends, she'd taken the time to apply a bold red lipstick, something she hadn't worn in years, and had tied her hair up in a loose, bohemian knot. The perfume she wore filled the room, and when I looked at her, there was a glint of excitement in her eyes that I could no longer pretend was just about art. "You're really going all out for an art class," I said, keeping my tone light, trying to mask the unease creeping into my voice. She shrugged, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. "I'm just trying something new. Luca says finding yourself sometimes means stepping out of the version of you everyone's gotten used to." Luca says. That phrase was becoming an almost nightly refrain, like he was teaching her about life itself. I couldn't help but feel jealous, but more than that, I felt I was losing something, or rather someone. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone chimed with a notification on the counter. I glanced at the screen, and there it was again, just L. Something made me stop, just for a moment, and I couldn't help but notice the way she'd been texting with him. I tapped open the message, feeling guilty, yet compelled. The words I read struck me like a punch in the gut. "I can't stop thinking about last night. It's like I'm finally awake, seeing color in the world again." My heart sank as I scrolled up to see previous messages, each one laced with an intimacy that I hadn't felt from her in years. "You're right. Life is too short to play it safe." Another message. "When I'm with you, I feel like I'm discovering a side of myself I didn't know was there." There was no doubt anymore. This wasn't a friendly exchange about art or even admiration for a mentor. This was something else, something deeply personal. The connection she shared with him wasn't about paintbrushes or canvases. It was something I'd never given her, or something she'd forgotten she could find with me. When she emerged from the shower, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't meet her eyes. There was a heavy silence as she got ready, her fingers lightly grazing my shoulder as she passed by to get dressed, oblivious to the turmoil roiling beneath my calm exterior. That night, as she walked out the door in one of her new artistic outfits, I was left standing alone, filled with a sense of dread I could no longer deny. When Grace announced that Luca was holding a weekend workshop, I felt my chest tighten. She told me the workshop was a special, invitation-only retreat for his dedicated students at a picturesque bed-in breakfast in a nearby town. Her eyes were bright with anticipation, but my instinct screamed that something wasn't right. "You're really putting in a lot for this class," I said carefully, watching her reaction. "Why don't I come with you? It'll give us a chance to spend some time together." But Grace shook her head almost immediately, with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You wouldn't enjoy it, Sam. It's going to be all art talk and exercises from dawn to dusk. I'll barely have a moment to breathe, let alone keep you entertained." The enthusiasm in her voice seemed excessive, almost rehearsed. For the first time, I wondered if she was as thrilled about the art as she was about the idea of being away. Still, I kept my tone light. "I don't mind a little art talk. It might be fun for us to get out of town together." "No, really, Sam." She squeezed my hand briefly, almost like a parent trying to soothe a child. "This weekend is important for my growth in the class. I just need to focus on my work with Luca." There it was again. My work with Luca. Her voice softened whenever she said his name. That touch of excitement, maybe even reverence, seemed to have a life of its own, one I wasn't a part of. She packed that Friday with more attention to detail than I'd seen in years, selecting her outfits carefully, even buying a new perfume for the weekend, a scent I had never smelled on her before. The unease gnawed at me. When she left for her weekend workshop, I didn't head to work. Instead, I took a different path, one that eventually led me to the venue she had named. When I called the bed and breakfast, my suspicions became a reality. The receptionist kindly informed me that no art workshop was scheduled. I held the phone tightly, swallowing the anger that simmered beneath my confusion. I had always trusted Grace. Our whole life was built on trust. But here I was, piecing together a reality that felt like a betrayal at every turn. I decided then and there I needed to see this through, even if the answer shattered me. Following her wasn't something I ever imagined doing, but I knew that if I didn't confirm what I suspected, the doubt would haunt me for the rest of my life. So I drove, taking the road she might take, heading towards the bed and breakfast direction, but stopping just before where a nearby, isolated cottage rested by a lake. It seemed far too serene a place for the storm raging in my mind. After parking my car down the road, I waited. The hours stretched, each one more painful than the last. Just when the sun dipped into late afternoon, I saw her car slowly pulling up, followed by another one, a red convertible I didn't recognize. Luca stepped out, dressed casually but stylishly, with the easy confidence of someone who knows he's adored. I watched, heart pounding, as Grace met him, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She leaned close to him, her hand lingering on his arm, her laughter echoing faintly across the lake. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as they walked together toward the secluded cottage, looking every bit like a couple on a romantic getaway. The anger, the betrayal, all of it surged within me. There, in the quiet of that forested lakeside, I realized that the life I thought I shared with Grace had been an illusion. She had chosen to be with him, not just emotionally but physically too. I watched from a distance as they disappeared inside, the door closing behind them. My chest ached with the weight of betrayal, but I stayed, waiting. The truth became undeniable as I sat alone in my car, watching from a distance. My stomach twisted with dread, every suspicion I'd pushed down surfacing with full force. I told myself I had to see it to the end, even if it meant facing a reality that would tear me apart. I parked just out of view of the cottage, careful to keep my distance. From my spot, I could see a window where the curtains were slightly parted. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know. I needed to understand the extent of her betrayal. Inside, Grace's laughter drifted faintly into the quiet evening air. Luca was close to her, his body language confident, familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. He leaned in, brushing a lock of hair from her face with a tenderness that should have been mine to offer. She didn't resist. Instead, she looked up at him, a softness in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. The intimacy between them was unmistakable, an unspoken language exchanged in their glances, the way she rested her hand on his arm, her fingers tracing small circles on his wrist. The scene before me blurred, tears threatening to spill over. I hadn't seen that version of Grace since our early days. She'd saved that spark, that part of herself, not for me, but for him. Then, just as I thought I couldn't bear another second, they drew closer. His hand slid along her waist, pulling her toward him, their silhouettes blending as he whispered something that made her smile. Their laughter turned into quiet murmurs, then silence as they moved to the couch, tangled in each other's arms. The pain of it felt physical, sharp, and inescapable. Watching them, a mix of devastation and fury welled up inside me. I couldn't stand another second of it. I pushed the car door open, the sound slicing through the silence of the evening. It took everything in me to stay calm as I approached the cottage, my footsteps heavy with the weight of betrayal. I pushed the door open, and there they were, caught in their tangled embrace. They broke apart, startled, with Grace's eyes widening in shock as she realized it was me. Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with guilt. The room was thick with tension, and I struggled to keep my composure. "How long, Grace? How long have you been lying to me?" She looked down, pulling a blanket over herself, trying to cover up what couldn't be hidden. It's complicated." "No, it's not," I replied, my voice a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You owe me the truth. All of it. After a long pause, Grace began to speak, her voice shaking. It started with the art class. Luca, he made me feel alive again, like I was finally doing something meaningful. I didn't intend for it to go this far, but he helped me see parts of myself I'd forgotten. I shook my head, anger simmering. So, he helped you rediscover yourself by destroying our marriage? Her defenses crumbled, and she broke down, admitting what I had dreaded most. Luca made me see that I needed to be true to myself, even if it meant leaving. In that moment, the woman I'd known for years felt like a stranger, someone I'd never fully understood. Without another word, I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of each step as the life I thought I had slipped further away. Back in our home, the silence felt oppressive, weighted by the betrayal that lingered in every corner of the room. I stood across from Grace, waiting for answers, for something that could explain why she'd thrown our life away for a man she barely knew. The woman in front of me, though familiar, seemed changed, her expression guarded, almost detached. Why Grace? My voice was strained. Why risk everything we've built? All these years for him? She looked away, her fingers twisting around a stray thread on her sleeve. Finally, she met my gaze, a defiant spark in her eyes. Sam, you don't understand. It's not about him, it's about me. I shook my head, frustrated. So, you need to find yourself by wrecking our life together? What about our plans, our marriage, the years we've spent building this life? Grace took a deep breath, and her shoulders sagged under the weight of her confession. You don't get it. It's not just about the years, Sam. Luca, he made me realize that I've been living a life I don't even recognize. He reminded me what it's like to feel alive. My chest tightened, and I could feel anger creeping up, lacing every word. So, all this time, you've been searching for some thrill, and now you're convinced you've found yourself by betraying me? Her voice softened as if trying to make me understand. Sam, I'm not trying to hurt you. But Luca, he's different. He showed me a life I'd locked away, a life where I could be free, expressive, alive. For once, I was focusing on me. And I was here, focusing on us. I replied, the bitterness surfacing. And now you're ready to throw away our marriage for some idea of freedom? She nodded slowly, as if the thought had finally taken shape, her voice quiet. Yes, in some ways, I feel more myself with Luca than I ever did with you. With him, I'm not just a wife or an obligation. I'm just me. I felt hollow, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Her words sank in, each one more painful than the last. She wasn't just captivated by Luca. She'd internalized his ideals, questioned everything we'd built together, and found it lacking. Grace's gaze softened, but it didn't hold the same warmth I'd always known. It was distant, as if she was looking beyond me, into a future she had mapped out without me. As she talked, I realized she was already more invested in this fantasy life than in the reality of our marriage. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was rewriting the narrative of her life, erasing everything we'd been. I sat in silence, absorbing her words, feeling the remnants of our life slipping away. And there, with her confession echoing in my mind, I knew that whatever lay ahead, it would never be the same. I was out of options, and my patience had worn thin. The woman standing before me was hardly recognizable as the wife I'd shared my life with for years. But I wasn't ready to let our marriage, our memories, go so easily. Grace, I began, trying to keep my voice steady, I need you to make a choice. It's either Luca and whatever fantasy you've created with him, or our marriage. I need an answer now. She froze, my words hanging in the air, her face twisting in a blend of confusion and frustration. Sam, don't do this. I need space to understand myself, to figure out what I want. I think you know what you want. I shot back, a mix of desperation and resolve. But if you leave this house today, there's no coming back. We end this here and now. Grace's hesitation was brief, but I saw the resolve in her eyes harden as she took a slow, measured breath. She glanced at me, and then past me, as though already envisioning herself in a different life. "I deserve happiness, Sam," she said softly. "And I can't keep pretending that I'm happy with this life with you." The finality of her words stunned me. For years, I had been the one constant in her life, the one who encouraged her, supported her, loved her. And now, in a moment, she was choosing to walk away, dismissing it all with a hollow phrase about finding happiness. "You're giving up on us?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping. All those years just thrown away because of some idealized version of freedom? Her face softened, but her resolve was unchanged. "This isn't easy for me, Sam. But Luca, he makes me feel alive in ways I haven't felt in years. I can't ignore that." She walked into our bedroom to pack, moving swiftly, purposefully, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I watched her, my anger growing as I saw her emptying drawers, tossing her clothes into a suitcase like our life together was something she could fold away and stow. There was no looking back, no second-guessing. As she zipped up her suitcase, Grace turned to face me one last time, her expression distant, unreadable. "I hope, in time, you can understand why I had to do this." "Understand?" I replied, my voice low. "I'll never understand how you can abandon everything for a fantasy." She didn't answer. Instead, she gave me a brief, regretful nod, then walked past me and out the door, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Watching her leave, it felt as though she'd taken every memory, every promise, and every dream with her, leaving behind an emptiness I couldn't fill. Standing there alone, abandoned and betrayed, a single thought formed in my mind, simmering with the hurt and anger that her choice had ignited. She may have chosen her illusion of happiness over reality, but I would make sure she'd regret it. In the days following Grace's departure, I wrestled with my heartbreak and the betrayal she'd left in her wake. I tried to piece together how everything had come crashing down. And then, almost as if fate had dropped a revelation into my lap, I stumbled upon the key to a bitter, satisfying justice. Grace had left her laptop behind in her rush to be with Luca, so one night, curiosity got the best of me. I opened it up and began searching through her files and messages. Soon enough, I found her emails with Luca, each exchange filled with shallow promises, encouragements, and flirtations that seemed to mirror the words she'd once shared with me. My heartbreak intensified as I read her pouring out emotions she hadn't spared for me in years. But something else caught my eye: messages from other women. Names of other students in her art class appeared frequently, as well as subtle hints that Luca had been involved with them, too. I reached out to a few of the women under the pretense of wanting more information about Luca's teaching methods, knowing that they might confirm my suspicions. One woman, Diane, had been one of Luca's favorites before Grace. She told me that Luca had a pattern of charming his students, convincing them to find their truth through art while making them believe he was their muse. Once they were hooked, he'd move on, leaving them devastated. Armed with Diane's confirmation and a stack of emails between Luca and several other women, I knew what I had to do. I sent anonymous messages, carefully written to avoid suspicion, to a few of the art community's influential contacts, as well as to his gallery associates and a handful of former students who were likely to spread the word. The fallout was swift. Within a few days, whispers of Luca's relationships spread throughout the community. News of his unprofessional conduct circulated, leaving Luca scrambling to defend himself. The once respected instructor was exposed as a manipulative fraud, more interested in exploiting his students than in teaching them art. The gallery where he displayed his work cut ties, and students began withdrawing from his classes. It didn't take long for Grace to realize she had been just another pawn in Luca's game. And once the scandal erupted, Luca did what he always did. He abandoned her to save himself, casting her aside like every other woman he'd ensnared. One evening, a few weeks after the scandal broke, Grace appeared at my door. Her expression was one I'd never seen before: humbled, vulnerable, and painfully aware of what she'd lost. She apologized, saying she'd been wrong, that Luca had used her, that she'd been blind to everything that truly mattered. She asked if we could start over, but as I stood there, watching her plead, I felt nothing but a quiet resolve. I'd gone through my own painful journey these past weeks, and I'd found a part of myself I'd nearly forgotten, a strength I'd never known I had. I realized I'd moved on, that I didn't need her validation, nor did I need to give her the chance to hurt me again. "Grace," I said, my voice steady, "you made your choice, and I've made mine. I hope you find what you're looking for, but it won't be with me." I closed the door, feeling a weight lift as I walked away. Grace was left to face the wreckage of her choices alone, her fantasies shattered, her illusions exposed. And as for me, I stepped into a new chapter, stronger and wiser, finally free from the shadows of betrayal and ready to embrace a life built on truth and resilience.